Hello, Internet. I'm Evan Deshevsky, features editor with PCMag.com. Welcome to The Convo. So today we're going to be talking about living on Mars. Now, this is not science fiction. The truth of the matter is humans are going to live on Mars one day, and it's probably going to happen a lot sooner than you're thinking. Now, NASA has announced that it wants to put humans on Mars by the mid-2030s, but Elon Musk thinks he can do it about 10 years before then, so, you know, sometime during Donald Trump's third term, thereabouts. Okay, so colonizing Mars is a real, actual thing that is going to happen, and people are working on it right now, and we wanted to learn a bit more about that. Today's guest is Stephen Petranek.
Petranek. Close enough.
Yep. He is the author of the book How We'll Live on Mars, and it's featured in the new National Geographic Channel miniseries aptly titled Mars. And by the way, the series Mars is great. It is fantastic. I've had a chance to see 2 episodes now, and they are great. If you like space and science and the future, you'll think it's fantastic. Even if you hate that stuff, I think you'll still think it's fantastic. So it's basically part fictional account of the first humans in the future who will be living on Mars, but it also intersplices with the views of experts and scientists who are working today to get us there. And one of them is Stephen. Okay, but before we get to that show, let's actually maybe roll a brief clip of Mars to show you where we're talking.
So we have this machine called MOXIE that's going to go up on the next Curiosity rover in 2020.
It'll collect CO2 from the Martian atmosphere, strip off the carbon, and release the oxygen.
NASA intends to build the same machine 100 times bigger, or to have 100 times the capacity, and actually to situate it on the surface of Mars at least 2 years before astronauts land on Mars, and have it make oxygen for 2 years and store it in tanks to be used both as fuel and both as something that astronauts can breathe.
Whoa, let's go to Mars. Okay, so for all of you at home, the show is called The Convo, not The Dialogue, so we want to hear from you. So drop your questions in the comments, and Social Pete will read them off later in the show. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure for being here.
And sorry for the delay, folks, but we're live now. We're here with you. Okay, so Stephen, you're a big Mars optimist. I think that's easy to say. You think
I'm not as optimistic as Elon Musk.
Okay, well, NASA officials, they want to get humans sometime in the mid-2030s.
That's a misleading statement.
Okay, go ahead.
They've got this SLS launch system, which is just a slightly bigger Saturn V rocket, and based on the same technology as the Saturn V. And they've got a capsule on top called Orion, and Orion is just a big Apollo. This is Apollo on steroids. They can orbit Mars. They don't have a lander.
Okay.
They can't land people on Mars as far as I know.
Right.
So what they've really got is a Mars orbiting system, and they say they'll be there sometime in the 2030s.
Okay. And then Elon Musk comes along. He had his big plan about 2 months ago, or at least went public with it about 2 months ago, saying he wants to make this multi-decade system where he wants to start bringing stuff now and just like landing it there so the first colonists will have stuff to use. Do you think, so what kind of timeline is he looking at, and what do you think about his timeline?
His timeline is 2024 to land the first people. In 2018, he will take a Falcon Heavy rocket, which he has not launched one of yet, but is building them. He'll take a Falcon 9, a Falcon Heavy rocket. It's the Falcon 9 with 2 extra first stages bolted to it. So it's like 3 first stages, 27 engines. It can carry 2.5 times what a Falcon 9 can carry. He'll put a Crew Dragon capsule on it. That's the one he'll start sending astronauts to the space station in next year. It can carry 7 people. He'll put a Crew Dragon capsule on it, but it'll be filled with cargo. And he's going to launch it to Mars in 2018 and land in 2018 vertically. Not an easy feat. And if he's successful, and even if he's not successful, he's going to do it every 2 years after that, and then he says drop humans on Mars in 2024.
Okay.
I think that's a little optimistic, but I would bet, give you a 90 to 1 odds that somebody will be on Mars by 2030. That's only 14 years from now.
Wow. Now, if anyone who's just joining us, drop your questions about Mars in the comments, and we'll read them off later in the show. Now, what we're talking about, I think, now is the first humans. They're probably going to plan on coming back.
No.
No. You think by 2020?
No, the days of space exploration are over as far as the commercializing of space.
Okay.
You have to remember, SpaceX is founded for one principle and one mission statement only, to build a sustainable settlement on Mars. We used to call it a colony. That's kind of a dirty word, so we call it settlement now. And that's what they exist for, that entire company. Fastest growing, most successful rocket company in the history of rocketry. So they're going to get there probably before anybody else.
Okay.
The problem that SpaceX has is that they're not developed in keeping people alive on the surface. NASA's really good at that. So my guess is what really happens in the end is you have kind of a partnership with NASA and SpaceX. And NASA may not even put any money into this, but they will put expertise into it. The 2018 Red Dragon shot, as they call it, to Mars that SpaceX is doing is really interesting because NASA is not putting any money into that, because if they did, then they'd have to open the contract up to anybody who wanted to bid for it. SpaceX is going anyway. SpaceX can take risks. NASA won't take risks for a lot of very good reasons, because their budget will get killed by Congress the minute they start killing people or doing stupid stuff and rockets. You know,
Congress tends not to like that.
we have, you know, 2/3 of all the things that have been sent to Mars, including every Russian probe, which is a lot of them, have failed. We have the 2 Viking landers, we have Sojourner, we have Spirit, Opportunity, and now Curiosity. Those are all extremely successful. The last thing NASA needs at this point is a failure on Mars. So they're perfectly willing to have SpaceX essentially take this risk and go there, and they will get the knowledge that SpaceX accumulates, and probably the knowledge will be the greatest if SpaceX fails and has a problem on landing, because it's a very difficult place to land a rocket vertically on, because the atmosphere is so thin.
Do we have a question? Yeah. Let's go.
What should someone pack for Mars?
Optimism, hope. You really, I mean, you need food, water, shelter, and clothing to live on Earth. You need food, water, shelter, clothing, and oxygen to live on Mars. So there's lots of water on Mars. The clothing problem is not too complicated. You do have to wear some kind of spacesuit because the Martian atmosphere is so thin. On Earth, we have 15 pounds of pressure pushing every square inch on us, and that's the atmosphere that's piled up above us. You don't have that on Mars. So on Mars, you kind of turn into the Michelin tire man, and your eyes would literally bulge out of your head. So you have to wear something that kind of holds you together. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem really is the oxygen, and we have a machine that makes that now. And what it does is, Mars' atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, but carbon dioxide is a carbon, which has an atomic weight of 4, and 2 oxygen atoms, which have an atomic weight of 16. So that means that the oxygen in a CO2 molecule is 72% oxygen. So if you can get the carbon atom off, you got pure oxygen. If you can find water, and there's a lot of water on Mars, you can use simple electrolysis to split it into oxygen and hydrogen. So we can make all the oxygen we need to breathe.
And that's actually a lot what the Mars special is about. It's about the first colonists and kind of how it's also kind of like how The Martian, the movie, sort of works. We had Davin Newman, the deputy administrator for NASA, in a few months ago.
She's the one who invented the spacesuit everybody will be wearing there.
Well, because we're talking about the Mars One project, where they want to send them there to live on Mars. But she was emphatic thing that the first people to Mars will come back. But you're saying you don't think that's going to happen.
Well, if it's NASA, they'll come back, because that's what NASA does. They go, they walk around, they move a rover around, and they come back. NASA's mission is scientific to explore. But space is turning into a commercial enterprise now. You got Jeff Bezos is building a very serious rocket. You got Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, is building a rocket. You got Orbital Sciences, an extremely successful 30-year-old private rocket company. You've got Sir Richard Branson trying to get into space. You've got the Google people and Eric Schmidt from Google, who have an asteroid mining company that they're developing.
We had Chris Lewicki in
So
a few weeks
space
ago.
is going, you no longer need a government to get into space. If NASA gets to Mars first, they'll explore, their mission will be scientific, and they'll come back. SpaceX's mission in going to Mars is to build a permanent colony. Now, the interesting thing about that is in the State of the Union speech that Obama gave in 2015, he said we should go to Mars not, and these are almost his exact words, not just to explore, but to stay permanently. And so if you have the right president running NASA, you're going to get a technological push towards that. I mean, George Bush wanted to go to Mars until he saw the bill. And as long as you have the right person who wants to go there for the right reasons, you'll have a permanent base there. If it's just a NASA mission to prove we can land on Mars, like we proved we can land on the moon, then they're coming back.
Well, let's talk about how the life of the first people who go to Mars. That's what a lot of your book is about, and also he has a great TED Talk from 2 years ago. If you want to check out the book report version of his book.
Right.
So now you say that like people at first might have to live underground because there's a lot of radiation.
Yes.
Now they're going to get air from this special machine, which actually apparently has already been designed. Has it already been built?
Yep. Michael Hecht, a physicist at MIT, designed this machine with his colleagues and students several years ago, actually. It's going, a version of it, it's like this big. It's kind of a reverse fuel cell. It takes that carbon molecule, or that carbon atom off of the CO2. It's going on the next Curiosity rover in 2020 to Mars as a test. But the machine, and that machine will keep one human being alive indefinitely with oxygen. However, if they don't exercise too much. That machine is designed to be scaled up by a factor of 100. And what NASA originally invented that machine for was not for people to breathe, but to produce the oxidizer for rocket fuel, because you can't carry enough liquid oxygen with you to Mars to get back. So their idea is we take this big MOXIE machine, send it to Mars, it sits there, and there are two big tanks with it, and it fills the tanks up over a 2-year period. Then you fly to Mars, refuel your rocket, and you can come back, because NASA's always thinking about coming back.
Right. Facebook, I see you have a question.
Just because business tycoons are building rockets, does that really make space travel a commercial enterprise? Aside from rocket builders, who's actually making money here?
Nobody's making money yet. Everybody's spending lots of money. Orbital Sciences is making money, and they're quite successful. They built a business on basically using old missiles to develop rockets, but they now have the Antares rocket, which had a catastrophic failure a couple years ago, but is back in business. Rocketry is very binary. If you're really good at this, you succeed 80% of the time, fail 20% of the time. They're back in business, so you know, if Richard Branson ever gets Spaceship Two back in the air and it starts carrying passengers for $225,000 a trip, he's going to make money. I think Paul Allen's going to make money on space. We're on the edge of private rocketry being able to make money. I'm not sure whether SpaceX is making money or not, but they're making enough money to keep feeding their technological advancements till they get a Mars rocket.
Let's talk about plants and food. Now, botany was my least favorite science subject. I love science, but I hate plants. They're boring. So excuse my ignorance here, but so plants breathe carbon dioxide. I do know that much.
You got it.
Could a hardy enough plant survive on the Martian surface with all that carbon dioxide to breathe? Is it possible?
There's a problem, which is plants need a pressurized environment.
Okay.
Everything on Earth is designed to push out against that pressure. Your body is designed to push out against that 15 pounds per square inch. So plants would still have to be grown in a greenhouse initially until you start terraforming the planet.
I want to talk about that too. But
Once you start terraforming the planet, then plants are the real get-go thing. But the other problem is they don't do so well on a purely carbon dioxide atmosphere either. So if we start terraforming the planet in the right way, you'll get running water. When you have running water, then we will genetically modify the plants we have so they can live in a more serious CO2 environment, and they will begin to spit out oxygen. And if you cut down all the trees on Earth, kill all the plants on Earth, we're all going to die because
Don't do that.
Percentage of oxygen is going to go down a few percent, and we can't live if we are only breathing 19% oxygen instead of 21.5%. So you could have plants over a multi-century period on Mars contributing enough oxygen to start to actually change the atmosphere of Mars so that humans could eventually breathe it. But they wouldn't be the only factor.
Gotcha. Facebook, you have a question.
What can someone do to go to Mars?
Save a lot of money. Elon Musk is going to sell you a ticket for at least $350,000, probably about 10 or 15 years from now. He has this amazing plan, which is he's going to build a rocket that's big enough to carry 80 people. It's going to be a 2-stage rocket. It will launch to orbit, and then the first stage will be completely recovered back on Earth. You fill that up with fuel, launch it again. You fill up the second stage, which is now orbiting around Earth, with fuel. It takes off for Mars, and it eventually comes back. But that's one rocket. He's talking about building 1,000 such rockets, so that by the year 2050, he would be launching 1,000 rockets with 80 people in each rocket. That's 80,000 people going to Mars in one trip every 2 years.
Let's talk about terraforming. Now, the first time I heard the word terraforming was in the movie Aliens. So they had like all these colonists who were on this mission to go over decades to terraform this foreign planet, and they all got eaten by giant space bugs. So now terraforming is actually a real thing.
They're a little scary.
They're a little scary, yeah. But terraforming is like a real idea that people are thinking about. One of the plans is to melt the polar ice caps on Mars.
Correct.
That's, I guess, step one. And,
That's all you really need to. I mean, it's ecology is so synergistic, and it's so related to temperature, and especially on Mars. So you have all this frozen carbon dioxide at the poles, but it's barely frozen. In other words, a lot of it actually kind of evaporates back into the atmosphere in the summer, and then it freezes again in the winter. So it's just kind of barely frozen. If you could erect a giant solar mirror, which is really a solar sail, incredibly thin fabric, luminized on one side, you put it in what's called a statite orbit, which means that the sun is pulling it this way, Mars is pulling it that way, so it stays in one place. And then you just point it so that the sun's rays reflect on the south pole, primarily of Mars. All you need to do is raise the temperature to about 7 or 8 degrees, and then you get a massive amount of carbon dioxide going in the atmosphere. Atmosphere now is 1/100th of Earth's. You would probably increase the density by 30 or 40 times of the atmosphere in just a few years. Once you do that, when solar rays come in, they don't bounce back into space. They actually stay in that thicker environment and begin heating up the planet. So then you would get a band about 10 degrees north latitude, 10 degrees south latitude of the equator, where on a perfect day in the summer it can be 70 degrees down near the surface, a little colder up here. You get this band of temperate zone, probably very much like British Columbia, where water would melt or the ice, all the ice would melt. There's a tremendous amount of water on Mars, most of it frozen in the soil. Water would melt, you'd have rivers, it would snow, it would rain. In winter, the ice would freeze at night, but during the day it would be melted. In the summer, it would be melted all the time. You'd have lakes, and you'd be able to start growing plants. And everything just gets better and better and better as you heat the planet up.
Facebook, you have a question.
How do they intend to get anything done as far as construction goes without hydrogen cell technology having been perfected?
Hydrogen cell technology is a good idea, but that isn't what's really necessary. Frankly, what's really necessary is small nuclear power plants. You can do some of it with solar panels. Solar panels are very inert, they're thin, they're light, they're actually easy to make on Mars. And you're going to need to use the resources you find on Mars to create a civilization there. Stuff is just too heavy to bring from Earth and too costly. The only thing you're going to be bringing from Earth for a long period of time is freeze-dried food. That's going to make up about 80% of your diet. But everything else you're going to have to do on Mars.
Speaking of nuclear, one of the ideas I've heard is actually launching a small H-bomb on the poles to melt the ice caps.
Very bad idea.
I believe even Elon Musk said to do that, but you're
very bad idea. He did say that, and then a bunch of guys at NASA said, very bad idea. And you have not heard that out of his mouth since.
Okay.
You have the opportunity of creating a real nuclear winter. I mean, one of the easiest ways to fix Mars is to go out and grab an asteroid that's mostly ammonia, drag it back to Mars and crash it into the surface.
Sure.
Just the friction of crashing it into the surface would raise the temperature of Mars about 5 degrees. And the ammonia, which is nitrogen, which we need as a buffer gas, and hydrogen would break down in the sunlight, create a very thick atmosphere all of a sudden. But you'd have a nuclear winter for about 200 years. You'd have so much dust in the air. So bombs on Mars are not a good idea.
The jury's still out if there are actual microbes currently living on Mars. We don't think there's more advanced life, but we don't know. But if we did discover life there, microbe or more complex, would it be ethically behoove us to help preserve those species as we are the invading species to not invade upon their way of life?
theoretically, from a very idealistic point of view, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the scientists who say we shouldn't be landing anything on Mars unless we're extremely careful because we're going to contaminate the planet, and they want to treat Mars as a scientific park. I really understand that. I don't think the presence of humans, where they're going to land and the numbers they're going to land and be there are going to be a significant detriment to the planet. It's very unlikely there's anything alive on Mars. It's possible, but it's very unlikely. We're probably never going to find it with rovers. And we're probably going to find it in strange places. Like, there's so much water on Mars, we think there may be large underground lakes on Mars where water is actually still liquid. There could be life there. You know, there's a theory called panspermia, which means that we're actually all Martians, and that life on Earth, which we've never been able to explain, was actually seeded from Mars. Mars was an Earth-like planet 1 billion years before Earth was, when Earth was still a hot, volcanic, horrible place. And at that time, there were lots of big chunks of things flying around in our solar system. Those big chunks would hit Mars and knock part of it off, and they would come to Earth. We've found lots of parts of Mars on Earth. There are lots of Martian meteorites on Earth. We now know that a bacterium can survive that journey in space. So conceivably, if we found life on Mars, we might be sort of literally meeting our maker. But I think it's very doubtful. And the whole point of going to Mars is to preserve humans. We go extinct if we stay on this planet. If nothing else happens, this planet looks like Mars within 200 million years. We're losing our atmosphere just like Mars lost its atmosphere. In 1 billion years, the sun will begin to die and will either radiate everything on this planet to death, or it will throw the planet out of its orbit. We can't stay on Earth forever. We have to move somewhere else. Mars is actually practice. We move on from Mars probably before we seriously terraform it. Our technology is getting so good so fast that we probably will be able to develop rocket engines or propulsion devices that will allow us to go to an actual Earth-like planet in a reasonable period of time. So I suspect that before, you know, terraforming Mars is anywhere, depending on how much money you're willing to spend, it could be a 30-year project if you spend enough money. It could be a 300-year project. And to fix the atmosphere so we can breathe it, which is the biggest bugaboo, is a 1,000-year project. By then, we're out of here. We're out of this solar system, and we're into a different solar system.
Facebook, final question.
How is the M drive going to influence trips to Mars?
We always get an M drive question. Every space expert we get in here, go for it.
There are lots of theoretical propulsion systems that don't work yet.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to work. You know, and I don't think anybody else does either. When it's significant that we're still so reliant on chemical rockets, because they really, really work well, and they're really cheap. When you launch the first stage, the booster stage, it uses by far the most fuel of a Falcon 9 rocket. It uses 0.3% of the cost of that stage is the fuel. This stuff is really cheap. Everything else, like ion propulsion, ion electric, etc., is really expensive, and it doesn't have the push that chemical has. Musk has said, when he's been asked about how do we become interstellar instead of intersolar system, he says it's probably an antimatter engine, and that gets really complicated.
Sure. So I can ask a few quick questions. The moon, are you interested in that at all? Should we have a moon base or just skip it?
Moon's an absolute waste. You know, Kennedy apparently went to NASA in 1960 and said, I want to send a man to Mars. And they came back and they said, that might be a little ambitious. How about the moon? And he said, the moon, okay. Werner von Braun, who built the rocket to go to the moon, is such overkill. That rocket is 10 times bigger than it needed to be because he was building a Mars rocket. Because from the time he was a kid, he wanted to go to Mars. He thought there were sentient beings on Mars, living underground in gardens. Even in the late 60s and early 70s, when the Apollo program was coming to a close, he was beating down the door of Richard Nixon in Congress saying, do not build this stupid space shuttle. We need to go to Mars, and I can put a man on Mars by 1982. We've had this technology for more than 30 years. So the moon makes no sense. There's nothing on the moon for us. There's no atmosphere on the moon. There's nothing worth mining on the moon. The moon is just dumb. We should be going to Mars.
PC Mag exclusive, the moon is dumb. Okay, no, actually, and I want to ask one final question. We just had an election. Maybe you heard something about it. There's going to be a new president.
Don't remind me.
Okay, but basically the one thing related to science that he's actually said is that he wants to continue going into space, really continuing the Obama plan for space exploration as far as I can tell. As someone who perhaps has looked at it, what do you think Trump administration means for Mars or space exploration?
I think this is really a tough call.
Because it's not like he's gone back on anything else he said.
Yeah, right. It's a tough call because Republicans don't like to spend money on the space program, and they've cut NASA's budget by a factor of 16 over the last 30 or 40 years. And they're the ones who created all the pressure and said, why are we spending all this money to go to the moon, to go lasso an asteroid and put it in orbit around the moon, which is what that SLS Orion system was supposed to do originally, until The Martian came out, and all of a sudden NASA appointed a Mars director. Or a Mars human landing director. I don't think anybody was working for him, but so this is no one knows what's going to happen.
Literally, no one knows.
I would like to think that he's a space guy and would like to spend money on this, and it's a fairly discretionary part of the budget.
Yeah.
It's 1/16 of our GDP. So. Hopefully he'll spend the money on it and things will continue and maybe they'll even get more money. NASA should have a lot more money. Its budget has been cut. And we're at the point where we could do so much now. We're so good at this. So hopefully he's a space guy and NASA gets more money, but I'll tell you something, I'll be really shocked if that happens.
Well, it's a depressing note. But Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. The book is How We'll Live on Mars.
Yes, the book is How We'll Live on Mars.
The mini-series is just called Mars on Nat Geo. I believe every Monday. It's great. Check it out. Program notes. This coming Tuesday, the 22nd at 12 noon, Neil deGrasse Tyson will be right here. We'll be talking about his new book and about science and things like that. So tune in for that. That'll be here on Facebook on Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern. Hopefully not later. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thank you to Social Pete. Thank you to everyone who was
Thanks, Facebook.
part of the thank you to Facebook, everyone who's part of the conversation. And as always, be